Tom never expected that a single night could change his entire world. He stood in his dimly lit living room, staring at the half-packed suitcase Helen had left behind. The house felt too still, and the silence cut through him like a sharp blade. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, each second dragging painfully. Tom's eyes swept the room, taking in every sign of his wife's rushed departure. Drawers left open, clothes strewn about, and the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the air. The image of her footsteps out the door was burned in his mind. He struggled to believe this was truly happening. They had been married for 20 years, and even with their ups and downs, he had always assumed they would grow old together. But now, everything was shattering in front of him. Helen had told him she was leaving for someone else. She had looked at him without a hint of regret or fear. She explained she had found someone who made her feel alive again, someone who was richer and more exciting, she said. But Tom's heart still ached when he remembered her last words. "This isn't working. I don't love you anymore." Those words echoed in his head. It was more painful than any physical blow he had ever felt. Tom stood alone, his mind racing through memories, vacations, anniversaries, and even small moments like sharing a morning cup of coffee together. He had believed those memories were strong enough to keep them going. He never realized they could disappear so fast. Tom ran a shaky hand through his hair. The empty house felt haunted. He forced himself to move to the kitchen, where dirty plates from their last dinner together still sat on the table. It had been only 2 nights ago. He remembered Helen laughing at some silly show on TV, but that memory seemed like it belonged to another life. Now everything felt hollow. He realized with a chill that he had no idea what to do next. He had built his entire life around a woman who was now walking away. At that moment, as he sank onto one of the kitchen chairs, he felt true despair. He never imagined he could feel such deep hurt. He had always heard stories of marriages ending, but he never thought it could happen to him. Tom had believed in loyalty, in the bond they had forged through 2 decades. Yet here he was, sitting alone while the woman he had loved chose a different path. He wanted to call her, to beg her to come home, but a single glance at the half-packed suitcase told him not to humiliate himself. From this bleak point, Tom's life took a sudden twist. In the days that followed, he learned that Helen was not just leaving him for any man. She was leaving him for a well-off businessman named Leonard. Rumors around town hinted that Leonard was known for his fancy car, expensive suits, and luxurious lifestyle. At first, Tom couldn't help but compare himself to this man. Tom lived a simple life, working steady hours at a local firm. He had always been a good saver, but never flaunted money. Maybe that was part of the reason Helen found him dull. He always believed that caring gestures and steady support were worth more than flashy displays. But he was wrong. Helen was gone, and she wasn't looking back. In the weeks that followed Helen's departure, Tom struggled with his new reality. He had to move forward or risk sinking into a pit of despair. He went to work each morning, trying to keep himself busy with tasks and deadlines. He chatted with coworkers, forcing a smile when they asked him how things were at home. He avoided looking at family photos on his desk because they felt like painful reminders of a life he had lost. He pretended nothing was wrong, but it was impossible to hide the sadness in his eyes. On quiet nights, Tom found himself pacing the house, unable to sleep. He would stare at his wedding photo on the mantel. It showed him and Helen on their wedding day, smiling brightly. He remembered being so sure of their love then. He wondered if there had ever been signs that she was drifting away. Could he have done something differently? The questions tore at him, but there were no answers. She was gone, and he had to accept it. Still, Helen's departure came with paperwork and meetings with lawyers. She and Tom had built a small life together, and after 20 years, they had shared assets that needed sorting out. Tom felt a swirl of emotions, anger, grief, confusion, each time he stepped into his lawyer's office. His lawyer, Mr. Carter, was calm and supportive, guiding Tom through the messy process. Mr. Carter had known Tom for many years, and he advised him to keep his head down and finalize the divorce quietly. Tom was hesitant at first. He was not sure how much Helen would demand. After all, she left him for someone else, but they were still married legally. The law didn't care about feelings or broken promises. It had its own rules. One day, as Tom sat across from Mr. Carter, the lawyer leaned in and spoke in a gentle tone. He asked, "Are you sure you want to do this the way you planned?" Tom nodded. He had made a promise to himself that he would not stoop to Helen's level. He would not lash out or seek revenge. If she wanted to go, he would not stop her. He asked Mr. Carter to keep the settlement as fair as possible. Helen's lawyer was the complete opposite. He was aggressive, trying to get as much money and property as he could for Helen. But Tom held firm in his quiet approach, refusing to be provoked. What Helen did not know, what almost no one knew, was that Tom was on the edge of a major financial windfall. She saw him as a quiet man of modest means, but she had overlooked the fact that Tom had been carefully investing for many years. He had also inherited a small trust from his grandfather, and that trust was about to pay out an enormous sum. But no one else saw it coming. Tom had never told Helen the full story because he wanted to keep things private until he was ready. Over the years, his investments kept growing quietly, and the trust matured. It was a secret he never flaunted. To the outside world, including Helen, he was just a middle-class man living an ordinary life. She had mistaken his silence for complacency and lack of ambition. She never knew there would soon be millions resting in Tom's name. Despite this hidden fact, Tom did not want to rub it in her face. He believed there was no point in bragging or seeking revenge. The betrayal still hurt, and it scarred him. But he had once loved Helen with all his heart. So even though she had broken her vows, Tom wanted to do the right thing. He decided not to reveal the fortune that was coming. He let the divorce proceed normally, with no mention of what would soon land in his bank account. This was not an easy decision. Friends who learned about his secret asked him why he would let her leave without fighting back. But Tom felt it was best. His friend Paul once told him, "You owe her nothing, Tom. She cheated on you and walked out. Are you really going to let her get away without telling her that she's walking away for millions?" Tom only gave a small, sad smile and said, "She made her choice. I don't want revenge. I just want peace." Paul shook his head in disbelief but respected Tom's wishes. Time went by, and the legal process dragged on. Helen had already moved in with Leonard, who showed off his wealth by taking her on trips, buying her expensive gifts, and inviting her to parties. Helen's social media, once filled with pictures of her and Tom at modest family gatherings, was now full of glamorous photos. She flaunted her new life, smiling beside Leonard's fancy sports car, or strolling through high-end boutiques. Tom forced himself not to look, but sometimes curiosity got the better of him, and he would feel a twinge in his heart at how quickly she had replaced him. He also saw the changes in her expression. Helen looked excited, yet at times a bit forced, as if she was trying too hard to prove her happiness to the world. Meanwhile, Tom's life grew quieter. He worked hard, kept to himself, and tried to heal the wound in his heart. At night, he sometimes felt a loneliness that was hard to bear. The house was too large and silent for one person. But instead of letting the silence destroy him, he decided to fill it in a meaningful way. He started to explore old hobbies. He picked up his guitar from the basement, dusted it off, and played songs he used to love in college. He visited a local animal shelter and volunteered on weekends. He found a sense of purpose in helping animals that had been abandoned or mistreated. In them, he saw a reflection of his own pain, but he also saw their ability to trust again. Slowly, Tom realized that life could have bright moments, even after heartbreak. One of these bright moments came when he met Sarah, a fellow volunteer at the shelter. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was patient with the dogs that trembled in their cages, coaxing them out with soft words and gentle pats. At first, Tom was hesitant to let anyone close to him, but something about Sarah's caring nature made him feel safe. They began talking about small things, music, favorite foods, funny stories about the animals. He was surprised to find himself laughing again. The sound of his own laughter felt foreign after so many lonely nights. It wasn't long before Tom found himself looking forward to seeing Sarah every weekend. He didn't realize it, but a new chapter in his life was unfolding. Still, he kept his guard up. He was not ready to open himself fully. The betrayal from Helen was a fresh wound. But the steady, gentle warmth of Sarah's presence worked on him like a soothing balm. She never pried into his past or pressured him to share more than he was comfortable with. She seemed to sense his need for time and allowed him to move at his own pace. Even as Tom's personal life took these small positive steps, his divorce dragged on. Helen's lawyer kept pushing for a bigger share of the assets, claiming Helen had contributed a lot to the marriage over the years. But Tom's simple, honest records showed they had shared things fairly. They owned a modest house, 2 cars, and a small savings account. Helen thought that was all there was. She didn't suspect there was anything more. In truth, that assumption was correct at the moment. The trust and investments Tom was set to receive were not yet legally his. He only had documents stating that soon, once final approvals were in place, he would inherit a massive fortune. But that day had not come yet, and Tom had no intention of using that money as a weapon in court. Eventually, Helen's lawyer and Tom's lawyer came to an agreement. It was a painful process, but Tom was finally ready to sign the divorce papers. The day he walked into Mr. Carter's office to finalize everything, Tom felt a shiver. This was the end of a 20-year marriage, and it was also the start of something new. Helen did not show up in person to sign. She had other plans with Leonard, or so Tom was told. It was just Tom, his lawyer, and the quiet dryness of legal documents waiting for signatures. When it was done, Tom walked out onto the street, feeling both free and oddly hollow. He did not expect a wave of relief, but that was exactly what swept over him. He felt as though he had shed a heavy burden. This did not erase the hurt or the memories, but at least there was closure. Helen was no longer his wife. The final heartbreak was that she never even said goodbye in person. She simply walked away and did not look back. A few weeks later, Tom got the phone call he had been waiting for. It was from the trustee overseeing his grandfather's legacy. The large sum of money and stock investments Tom had quietly built up over the years were finally his to claim. The exact total was even bigger than Tom had thought, over $60 million. He stared at the statement, heart pounding. The number seemed unreal. He had spent much of his life counting his pennies, making sure to live within his means. And now this huge fortune was under his name. Tom sat in his living room, the same living room where Helen had packed her suitcase. He looked around. The walls were the same soft color, but somehow everything felt different now. Even with all that money, he felt a deep sense of caution. He knew that money could not bring back love that was lost, nor could it erase pain. But it could provide opportunities he never had. It could help him start a new chapter of life if he chose wisely. The thought of telling Helen crossed his mind. She had no idea what she had walked away from. She had left him for the promise of a richer life with Leonard, but in truth, she had abandoned someone who was about to be worth $60 million. A strange mixture of emotions tugged at Tom. Part of him felt vindicated, but another part felt sorrow for what their marriage had become. He also felt pity for Helen, who had sold her soul for what she thought was a better deal. He wondered how she would react if she found out. But Tom did not rush to call her. He did not see the point. The divorce was final, and she had already moved on. They no longer belonged to each other. Instead, Tom talked to Mr. Carter. He said, "No one needs to know, right?" The lawyer shook his head. "Not unless you want them to. It's your money, and you are no longer married to Helen. You're free to keep your affairs private." Tom thanked him and decided to keep living a quiet life, at least for a while. He had never enjoyed being the center of attention, and he didn't want to become a target for old friends or distant relatives who might only see him as a bag of money. So he continued working for a bit, but eventually, the demands at the office no longer made sense with his new financial standing. He realized he could do more good by focusing on projects he cared about, like the animal shelter. So he left his job on good terms and spent more time volunteering. The staff at the shelter had no idea Tom was a wealthy man. They just saw him as a kind soul who wanted to help animals. Sarah, who continued volunteering alongside him, noticed that Tom seemed more at ease. He talked a little bit more about his past, careful not to mention the fortune. He told her about the divorce. explaining that Helen had left for someone else. Sarah listened without judgment, her eyes full of sympathy. She did not pry into details. Instead, she offered her presence, her quiet understanding, and the gift of genuine friendship. Over time, their friendship turned into something deeper. Sarah and Tom found that they enjoyed strolling through the park after their volunteer shifts. They would grab a coffee or a light meal, chatting about everyday life. One evening, after spending hours at the shelter, they decided to get dinner at a small diner nearby. As they sat across from each other, sharing a slice of pie, Sarah gently placed her hand on Tom's. He felt a warmth run through him that he had not felt in years. He realized that although life had thrown him a painful curve, it had also opened a door to a possibility he had never imagined. Sarah represented a chance at love built on kindness and mutual respect. Tom drove Sarah home that night, and before she stepped out of the car, she leaned over and gave him a tender kiss on the cheek. It was not flashy or dramatic, but it carried a gentle promise. In that moment, Tom felt a part of his heart heal. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he was no longer walking it alone. Months went by, and Tom began to explore ways to use his new wealth for good. He consulted financial advisors to invest some of it wisely, but he also started a small foundation to help animals in need. The staff at the shelter were stunned when large donations started coming in, though they had no idea the source was Tom. He preferred to remain anonymous, simply wanting to see the animals taken care of. Sarah noticed the improvements at the shelter and smiled in gratitude. She was impressed by whoever the secret donor was, never guessing it was the man standing next to her each weekend. During this time, Tom caught glimpses of Helen's life through occasional gossip. Rumor had it that Leonard's business was not doing as well as he claimed. There were whisperings of financial troubles and debt. Some said that Leonard was involved in risky deals that had started to collapse. Tom did not take pleasure in hearing this. He had moved on from the bitterness. If anything, he felt sorry for Helen. She had left thinking she was upgrading to a better life, only to find herself in a shaky situation. But that was her path. Tom resisted the temptation to reach out or gloat. There was no point. The day Helen found out about Tom's secret came in a strange way. She heard rumors from a mutual acquaintance that Tom had come into an enormous fortune. She was shopping in town when she bumped into one of Tom's old co-workers. The co-worker casually mentioned something about Tom's new situation and how Tom had left the job. Helen's eyes narrowed. She pressed for more details, but the co-worker didn't know much. She quickly checked Tom's social media. He rarely posted, but she saw subtle hints. There were photos of him at certain events, smiling and looking happier than she had ever seen him. Helen began to suspect that she had made a huge mistake. Soon after, it was confirmed by someone else that Tom had indeed inherited a very large sum of money, and that he had known about it even before the divorce. The news was like a punch to Helen's gut. She realized she had walked away from a marriage with a decent, loyal man who was actually on the brink of becoming extremely wealthy. She had chased what she thought was a better life with Leonard, only to discover that it was not what it seemed. She felt sick to her stomach. She remembered how she had treated Tom, how she had sneered at his simple lifestyle. She recalled the final words she had said to him, telling him she didn't love him anymore. Shame and regret gnawed at her. She realized she had thrown away 20 years of marriage in a quest for excitement and quick riches. Now she was left with a man who was drowning in debt, while Tom had become the very person she had yearned for, financially secure and emotionally stable. Helen wrestled with the idea of contacting Tom. Perhaps she could apologize, or at least find a way back into his life. But when she tried to call him, he did not pick up. When she sent an email asking if they could talk, Tom politely responded that he had nothing to say. He wished her well, but pointed out that they were no longer married and that he had moved on. Helen felt tears sting her eyes. She realized that she had lost him forever, not just as a husband, but as any kind of companion. Regret was now her companion, and it was too late to fix what she had broken. Tom, meanwhile, continued building his new life. As the months passed, he asked Sarah to join him in his dream of creating a larger animal care center. Without revealing the full scope of his fortune, he hinted that he had enough financial backing to make it happen. Sarah was thrilled, assuming Tom might have found a few big donors to help. She never pressed him for details, focusing instead on the joy of helping animals. Their relationship blossomed. They began spending more evenings together, watching old movies or cooking simple meals at Tom's place. Over time, Tom grew to trust Sarah's genuine heart and realized he felt something strong for her. She never asked for money or favors. She was simply kind and loving. One night, while they were on the couch watching a documentary about rescued farm animals, Tom turned to her. The warm glow of the TV lit her face. He took a deep breath and said, "I need to tell you something about my finances." He then carefully explained his inheritance and investments. Sarah listened without blinking, a soft look of surprise in her eyes. When he finished, her face broke into a sincere smile. "That's wonderful, Tom," she said. She did not ask how she could benefit from it. She did not demand anything. She just asked, "How do you want to use it to make your life and the world better?" Tears filled Tom's eyes. He realized in that moment that he had found someone who loved him for who he was, not for the size of his bank account. That same night, Tom asked Sarah if she would move in with him. She agreed, and soon, the once lonely house began to fill with a sense of joy. They adopted an older dog from the shelter, a gentle retriever named Buddy, who had trouble finding a home because of his age. Now Buddy had a warm bed, and Tom and Sarah had a loving companion who bounded through the yard with surprising energy. As time went on, Tom continued with his plans to fund the new animal care center in the city. It was built on a large piece of land and had spacious areas for cats, dogs, and even farm animals that needed rescue. Sarah was deeply involved, managing the day-to-day work and coordinating volunteers. Tom still kept a low profile, but his presence was felt through his kindness and leadership. In a quiet ceremony among the staff, volunteers, and a few close friends, they officially opened the center to the public. On the day of the opening, Tom realized how much his life had changed in just over a year. He no longer felt the bitter sting of Helen's betrayal. Instead, he felt gratitude for the chance to start again. With Sarah by his side, he had found a peace that he never knew before. The memory of Helen was like a distant ache, a reminder of a life that once was, and that was better left behind. A few months after the center opened, Tom decided to propose to Sarah. He did not want a grand gesture. He wanted something intimate and sincere. So one evening, after they finished feeding the animals at the center, Tom took Sarah's hand. Under a soft light in the courtyard, surrounded by the quiet snuffles of the rescued animals, he knelt down on one knee. Sarah gasped. Tom looked up at her with gentle eyes and said, "You've shown me that love can be pure and kind. You helped me trust again. Will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes shone with tears as she whispered, "Yes." They shared the news with friends and the staff at the shelter. Everyone was overjoyed. Tom felt a surge of hope and love, a stark contrast to the emptiness he had felt the night Helen left him. He understood now that endings can lead to new beginnings. His marriage to Helen ended with heartbreak and betrayal, but it opened the door for him to find Sarah, a woman who truly saw him and accepted him for who he was. Their wedding was a modest but beautiful event, held in the gardens of the new animal care center. Friends and volunteers gathered to celebrate. Tom wore a simple suit, and Sarah looked radiant in a white dress. They exchanged vows under an arch decorated with flowers, while Buddy the retriever lazily napped by their feet. As they kissed to seal their vows, a soft breeze carried the fragrance of spring blossoms through the air. It was a moment of pure happiness. In that single kiss, Tom felt all the pain from the past slip away. Later, as they walked among the guests, Tom caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Helen stood at a distance, looking uncertain. She had come uninvited, perhaps to see if she could talk to him. She wore a dress that looked hastily chosen, and she held a small bag by her side. Tom's heart lurched, but he felt no anger. He no longer held any space for her in his future, but he also did not hold hate. He excused himself from Sarah's side for a moment and walked over to Helen. She looked at him with eyes full of regret. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a shaky apology. Tom nodded, acknowledging her words. Then he said quietly, "Helen, I'm sorry things ended the way they did. But we both chose different paths. I have no ill will toward you. I truly hope you find peace." Helen's lips trembled, and tears pooled in her eyes. She realized she had lost him for good. She muttered her thanks and turned to leave. Tom watched her go, feeling a bittersweet twinge, but no bitterness. He turned back toward Sarah, who was watching him with understanding. He returned to his wife, smiling at the simple truth that he had found genuine love after all the pain. In the following weeks, Tom and Sarah settled into married life. They continued to grow the center. The media caught wind of their success, praising them for creating a haven for animals in need. Donations poured in, and they expanded their reach, rescuing more creatures from dire situations. Through it all, Tom remained humble, remembering how his life had once felt empty. Now it felt full, rich in ways that went beyond money. One afternoon, Tom and Sarah were walking the grounds of the animal center, checking on new arrivals. Sunshine warmed their faces as they held hands. Tom spotted Buddy sniffing at some butterflies near a small pond, wagging his tail in excitement. He squeezed Sarah's hand gently, a silent expression of gratitude for the life they had built. Sarah looked at him with a radiant smile. "You seem happy," she remarked, her tone warm. "I am," Tom answered, his heart brimming with sincerity. He realized that true joy was not about wealth or revenge. It was about finding someone who loved him wholeheartedly and about dedicating himself to a cause he believed in. He had found a new sense of purpose, and his heart felt lighter than it had in a very long time. They watched Buddy chase a bird that flew just above his reach, and they both burst out laughing. Sarah's laughter rang across the yard, and Tom found himself joining in, realizing that this was the sound of a new chapter in his life. All the memories of heartbreak, betrayal, and loss were now simply stepping stones leading him to a better place. As he stood there, hand in hand with Sarah, Tom felt at peace. He thought back to that dark night when Helen had walked away, not knowing she was leaving behind more than just a marriage. She had walked away from a future filled with real love and hope. And Tom had discovered that sometimes the worst moments lead to the brightest outcomes. He might never fully understand why Helen made the choices she did, but it no longer mattered. He had finally come home to a life that made him truly happy. As the afternoon sun began to dip, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and gold, Tom looked over at the woman beside him and the rescued animals all around them. Hope and love were all around him. And in that moment, with a full heart, he knew his story was no longer defined by betrayal or loss, but by the quiet triumph of someone who had learned to trust and love again.